The probationary firings certainly cast a little bit of a negative light on the idea of joining the cyber talent management system because you have to think that perhaps your position is not as stable as you once thought it would, and you could be fired with a snap of a finger.
Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and this week I have the privilege to sit down with Justin Doubleday. Justin is a prolific writer, reporter for Federal News Network. You see his pieces almost daily, and you hear him often on Federal News Radio. Really excited to have a long chat with Justin today and really delve into the workforce issues, because there are few entities that do it better than Federal News Network, and few writers who do it better than Justin. So Justin, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I thought we'd start sort of in a broader sort of context. No news going on in terms of the federal workforce these days, right?
No, it's pretty quiet.
Pretty quiet. But let's try to do a little bit of level setting and get a sense of where things stand, where you see some of the trends. And you've done a couple of really insightful pieces on this. So I thought I'd start with the softball. Where are we and where are we going?
Well, the trends generally with the federal workforce are you've seen a ton of attrition, obviously a lot of firings over the last 9 or so months across the board. And I think that while things have calmed down a little bit, you're seeing agency by agency, HHS continues to lay off workers. You're also seeing some folks brought back at agencies like the IRS, who perhaps they cut a little bit too deep in the spring, and now they're bringing folks back. From the cybersecurity standpoint, the cyber and tech workforce, if you will, that's certainly seen some cuts as well across the board. You can certainly start with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Lost about a third of its workforce, roughly 1,000 people since the spring. A lot of those are folks who either retired early or took the deferred resignation offer. Some were fired as well, and so that's kind of where things stand, is that there were a lot of terminations and a lot of resignations through the spring, and we still have a lot of those folks on the books until October 1st. And so we're kind of waiting to see exactly how many folks left and where the dust kind of settles as we get into the fall.
And you've written a little bit about the cyber talent management system. Anything you want to expand on here? Yeah,
so the cyber talent management system is an accepted service that was established by DHS about 4 years ago, and it's intended to offer kind of this separate track for cyber talent to offer them perhaps more money, to entice them to join the government, because we know the private sector can offer a lot more money. The types of money that the cyber talent management system can offer gets closer to the private sector. It's certainly not on par, but it gets a lot closer. And so DHS set up this system about 4 years ago after years of development, and it slowly got off the ground under the Biden administration. By about 2024, last year, they had hired roughly 200 folks, mostly at CISA, through this new system. And what happened in the spring was that a lot of those folks, because of the design of the cyber talent management system, it has an extended probationary period. And a lot of those folks who were hired over the last 4 years were still probationary, and they were swept up in that wave of probationary firings in the spring under the new Trump administration. And so a lot of folks at CISA in the cyber talent management system are now on administrative leave because of court cases involving those probationary workers, but it doesn't appear that they will necessarily come back and just slide back into the role.
Along those lines, you've also written about cyber pay and how it's fragmented, and given some of these developments with the cyber talent management system, is that because in addition to recruiting, it's also retaining some of this talent. Right. Do you think this is going to have a chilling effect and may deter or dissuade those that are committed to public service?
I think in the long term it remains to be seen, but certainly in the short term, we're under a hiring freeze right now, so it's not as if these positions are being backfilled for the most part. But what's happening, I think, with the cyber talent management system and other cyber pay systems across government is they brought this promise of we can pay you a little bit more, and we can also offer, as we always could, this compelling mission to join the government, and perhaps
which is a compelling mission.
Very compelling, and I think that was always the sale. But then this extra money, in some cases, 30% more money for an entry-level position, and certainly for an executive-level position, would entice more folks to join the government rather than joining the private sector. And of course, the mission was always a big piece of that. I think the probationary firings certainly cast a little bit of a negative light on the idea of joining the cyber talent management system, because you have to think that perhaps your position is not as stable as you once thought it would, and you could be fired with a snap of a finger.
Absolutely. And you've also written about the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center out of ODNI, and plans to shut that down. Any more light you want to shed on that?
Well, I think this is just one small piece of broader ODNI reforms, like massive ODNI cuts that are expected to reduce the workforce there by roughly 40%. And ODNI says it will save $700 million a year. The CTIIC was established, as you know, about a decade ago to really bring together cyber threat intelligence from across the intelligence community. And I think from folks like Michael Daniel, who helped
one of
set
our senior
it up.
fellows.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in his eyes, this is not something that can be replicated by the National Intelligence Council, which is where some of those functions will be going, because they don't have the expertise or the day-to-day focus on cyber threat intelligence that the CTIIC has had. And so I think there's concern that you're now going to go back to a situation where you have disparate views kind of bubbling up from across the intelligence community, and you don't have that single source of truth at the top that's helping to sort things out for leaders.
And not from a policy standpoint. This is just to know where the snapshot is at that moment, and that can have implications for response, right? I mean, ultimately, you want good intelligence to inform good decisions, which can be operationally relevant as well. So hopefully it doesn't have significant impact, but CTIIC maybe hasn't lived up to its initial intent, but it did play a major and significant role in at least getting the USG, the alphabet soup of the government, on the same sheet of music. It's not to suggest that some of those agencies aren't there, but you still need that integration. And hopefully that continues. You've also written about the clearance challenge, which is not a new issue, but you were looking specifically to some of the proposals put forward and legislative and otherwise by House Armed Services Committee and Senate Armed Services Committee. Can you give us a sense of where that stands and what we should be thinking there? Yeah,
this year's NDAA could be an interesting one from a security clearance perspective, because you have, in the House, a proposal to essentially allow businesses to submit more people for a background investigation on the front end when they're competing for a contract or they're trying to get folks cleared on a contract, and they can then have a bench on the back end when folks get through the investigation to try to pull them in. Because as we all know, things happen. You could have someone who you thought you were going to bring in and they could take a different job, or they could something could come up in their background investigation and you could ultimately not go with that person. And so having that bench on the back end of a months-long process could help some companies with that.
And could get to work faster, right? I mean, it's the capture team versus the team doing it. Exactly.
And on the Senate side, you have a provision that would allow folks to keep their access to classified information, essentially keep their security clearance active for longer once they leave government, bump that up to 3 years, which could help bring folks back in quicker.
In terms of reinvestigations. And
exactly.
And if there's one bill that seems to pass, it is the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, right?
I think so.
Is that going to have to be, are these going to be integrated, these two bills from HASC and SASC?
Typically, they go into conference at some point in the fall and they hash out the differences, and it'll be interesting to me from the security clearance side. These are two different ideas. They certainly could be complementary. Will the conferences decide that they want them both in there, or we'll see.
Horse trading never happens in D.C.
No, never.
In terms of other structural or cultural hurdles you're seeing, especially when it comes to reform efforts, anything come to top of mind to you?
Well, the big and the long-standing challenge is the timeliness issue when it comes to background investigations. This is something where it used to take, back in 2018 when there was a huge backlog, it could take years to get a top secret investigation done. It could take many months or up to a year to get a secret level investigation done. They've whittled that down on average to a much more reasonable state, but it still takes months in both cases to get through these investigations. And as we just talked about, that can limit companies from starting the job. That can just limit people from entering government service in the first place. I've known several people who, when they were waiting for their background investigation to be completed, they left because they took another job that didn't require it because it was just taking too long. And so that's the long pole in the tent, along with technology. There's this effort at the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency to modernize the background investigation IT system, the back end. And this is, many years over budget, or many years overdue, hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. And they're trying to get that back on track so that you can have a much more modern system that facilitates people moving between different agencies, moving between agencies and industry. And they're just not there yet.
And in a post-DOGE environment, what trends are you looking at and looking for in terms of just the general public service workforce?
Yeah, I think, as we talked about, a lot of people were terminated or left their jobs in the spring when DOGE was kind of at its height. And it was, especially from the cybersecurity perspective, the cyber workforce perspective, it was indiscriminate. It wasn't well thought out, in the words of a lot of folks that I talk to. And if you look at the reforms that CISA wants to make in their budget, those cuts don't necessarily line up with the folks who left. Folks left from across the board, a lot of high-end talent left. How do you fill in those positions? Where does an agency like CISA go from here? And I think getting a Senate-confirmed leadership in there will help quite a bit. But where does CISA go from here after that spring?
So basically, even not questioning intent, well-intended or not, at the end of the day, making sure you have the right people in the right jobs. That's and I've heard some voicing that whether it's Sean Planky and others, that they are committed to bringing some of those folks, if they were wrongfully or otherwise out of place, back. So hopefully we can square that circle, and hopefully we have some Senate-confirmed leadership in those roles. And it's much more than just the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. It's across the USG. I want to jump to another story you wrote that literally could be pulled from a James Bond kind of movie. And it's looking at, I normally don't put James Bond and IG reports in the same sentence, but it was a pretty eye-popping story that the Department of Justice came out, an IG report on El Chapo and some of the counterintelligence concerns and considerations there. Can you shed a little bit of light for our viewers and listeners on that particular story you wrote, and more broadly the IG investigation?
Yeah, well, the story I wrote focused on this idea of ubiquitous technical surveillance, which is a jargony term for essentially this world we live in where our
always on
smartphones are tracking our every movement. We have a lot of technology around us when it comes to surveillance systems and things like that. And so the DOJ Inspector General and the government generally has this term now to describe that technology kind of world that we live in, where you can be tracked throughout your life.
Mm-hmm.
And the DOJ audit that you were just talking about looked at how is the FBI doing in terms of preparing their workforce for this world and ensuring that they aren't unduly swept up by an adversary in that type of surveillance. And the story that came out, which shocked me as well in this audit, was in 2018, an FBI legal attaché was in Mexico City meeting with sources. And as it turned out, he was meeting with sources, or they were meeting with sources, we don't know who they were, for investigating the El Chapo's drug cartel. And while this legal attaché was moving around Mexico City meeting with sources, according to the DOJ audit, a hacker who was working for the cartel had actually infiltrated their phone, had been able to track both their phone calls and their geolocation data, and had also hacked into Mexico City's surveillance cameras and was able to watch them that way as well. And they were able to track who they were meeting with, their sources, obviously extremely sensitive, and then they were able to intimidate and in some cases even kill some of these sources. And so that just demonstrates the world that the FBI and everyone is now operating in.
That is, it's chilling in many ways, and the sophistication in tradecraft necessary to do something like that, you would have thought maybe resides in a handful of three-lettered agencies, but the fact that the cartels are demonstrating this capability and shouldn't be that surprising because there's a lot of money in that business and they're going to hire the best people and the best technology, and if not, they're going to buy the companies that run the telcos and the like at some point, but it's still sort of shocking when you see it. And what implications do you think this means more broadly from a foreign counterintelligence perspective, or even a criminal environment as we're seeing here?
Yeah, as you point out, the bar is much lower in terms of accessing some of these capabilities. Commercial spyware is much more easily accessible for a range of groups and individuals, and it's almost impossible to detect when spyware has gotten onto a phone of an individual, even for a cyber expert.
And you don't even have to click the link.
You don't have to
anymore,
click
right?
the link. You don't have to.
Clickless.
It's clickless. It's scary, as you said. And so I think from the audit that we were talking about, essentially the IG said that the FBI did not have a long-term vision for combating this type of threat and dealing with this world. Right. Does anyone really know what exactly to do? I think one of the concrete things that came out of the audit was that folks in the FBI's training section were trying to get more funding to help train folks to defend themselves against this type of world. And according to this audit, higher ups at the FBI denied that request. And so as it goes with technology and cybersecurity, things are often nice to have until they're necessary.
Absolutely.
And it seems as if we're always a little bit behind the eight ball.
That tends to be, we let the adversary shape our response in many ways, and hence we're sort of going at it backwards. But we do let big events drive, and that's understandable to a point, but it is unacceptable. We know what some of those concerns and considerations are, and if a drug cartel can do this, what can the Chinese do? What can the Russians do? What can the Iranians do? Or anyone else with a SIGINT capability? So it is kind of frightening, and it has implications beyond the FBI.
Absolutely.
And hopefully smart people are asking some of these questions right now. I know we're looking at some of those issues through our policy work, but tough one to get our arms around. And just spyware generally, it's commercially becoming more and more. So the bar is sometimes getting lower from a tradecraft standpoint because the technology is widely available, right? Did you look into that at all?
Well, I think there's been some efforts to ban spyware by governments. There's been efforts to essentially develop some consensus globally around this, but I think it's a tough thing to get your arms around. It's tough to ban any sort of technology, as we all know so well.
Once the genie's out.
So we haven't even talked about artificial intelligence and the way that can kind of supercharge some of these surveillance efforts, and also introduce things like deepfakes that can further kind of muddy the pool of public information and trick folks into doing things. We saw a deepfake of Secretary of State Marco Rubio go out to a lot of his employees globally, and the goal with those things, of course, is to convince folks that, hey, this is legitimate and I need to give up some sort of sensitive information. And those are only going to become more convincing, and it's just going to be that typical kind of cat and mouse game where you have to try to keep up.
And it's going to be hard. And for scammers, I mean, just to record someone's voice, very easy to do, and call your grandma, and next thing you know, your grandma's sending her retirement to some of these scammers. That is going to be something we've got to get our arms around, and I'm not sure they're easy answers to, but the fact that the IG put out a report should be eye-opening.
Unredacted with stories like that as well is pretty remarkable.
Absolutely. Let's go to some of the regulatory sets of issues and what we think this framework looks like from a digital agenda. And one in particular is CMMC and the Department of Defense, and you've done some great reporting there, and Katie Arrington's done work on this for quite some time. Where does that stand, and what are the implications in terms of promulgation of CMMC?
Well, after a 6-year saga that feels like maybe it was 60 years, it is now about to enter force as a contracting requirement. This started back in 2019. The CMMC term came about in 2019. It was started well before that, of course. And this idea of ensuring contractors were following these cybersecurity standards. And now folks expect that on about October 1st or a little bit after, this requirement will start trickling into defense contracts. And this is, of course, a program that involves third-party audits in many cases to ensure that contractors are following cybersecurity requirements. And so that's pretty remarkable in and of itself, because up until now it's been a lot of self-attestation, it's been a lot of self-certification, and sort of, hey, hope you're doing this, but we've got bigger priorities. We've got cost, schedule, and performance that we're more worried about than security. And now security is a part of that whole process. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this phased rollout works. DoD is not immediately throwing CMMC third-party audit requirements into every contract. It's going to take some time, but it is coming now. It's official. It's gotten through the regulatory process.
And you spoke to my friend Matt Travis for one of your stories on this. Anything that he highlighted?
Well, Matt Travis, of course, leads the cyber accreditation body, which is this nonprofit that is contracted with the government to run this essentially army of third-party auditors that will have to go out and, at the height of the CMMC program, deal with an estimated 80,000 companies that are going to require third-party audits under CMMC. And so his focus right now is in many different directions, but it's really on building out that capacity in the coming years, so that this big concern with the CMMC program is that it could essentially gum up the defense acquisition process, because companies are waiting around for
which we can't
cyber
do either, right?
Exactly. That's been kind of the tension all along. So that's a big issue.
Do you think it's going to have any other implications for future cyber regulations, or?
I think we haven't seen any other agencies come out and say we want to use CMMC, but a lot of these companies that sell services and products to the Defense Department also sell them to
other agencies.
Homeland Security, to many other agencies. And so the question is, to what extent will the rest of the federal government adopt CMMC or something like it versus go their own route? I don't think that is something that anyone wants to see. But as you know, a lot of agencies have their own ideas and their own priorities about what they would like to see from their contractors.
Well intended. And that's why we have a bit of a patchwork right now.
Exactly.
And I personally feel needs to be synchronized or streamlined or whatever it may be. And we recently had Senator Peters on to talk about some of his legislation along those lines. In that vein, you also wrote about the Do Not Pay database, and why is that important, and why now?
Well, it's the Treasury Department's do not pay database is supposed to be used by agencies across the federal government to ensure that when they're essentially spending giving federal dollars to a grant recipient or a benefit recipient, that this person is not someone who is a fraud actor or someone who should not be paid because for various reasons. And so the do not pay database is essentially supposed to help agencies verify that they're not making an improper payment or even giving money to a fraud actor. It's been underutilized according to not just the Trump administration, but fraud experts across the board. And so President Trump in March signed an executive order essentially directing agencies to make better use of do not pay, but also to boost the data that do not pay has in terms of accessing what HHS might have, what SSA might have. And so now the Treasury Department is trying to increase access to the data access as far as do not pay.
And that can help with getting visibility across our supply chains, right? I mean, that's one of the most vexing and challenging set of issues. And dare I say, AI and machine learning and other technologies can help with that. Not silver bullets, but can help with that across all federal agencies. And hopefully that can go to state, local at some point as well.
They do have access to that database as well. So
now, what about privacy? Are there any privacy implications?
Certainly. I mean, I think the big barrier for increasing the data that do not pay can access is the Privacy Act. And for good reason. When you give the government information, when you give the IRS information, you expect that they're going to use your personal data in the way that they have said they were going to, and not going to share it kind of willy-nilly across the federal government. And that's the whole intention behind the Privacy Act. But what's happened in kind of this modern digital world where a fraud actor can find a real social security number and develop a synthetic identity using that is that they're taking advantage of gaps when agencies don't share certain pieces of data across the board. And so that is what this effort under the Trump administration is aimed at, is ensuring that agencies can share data within the Privacy Act's framework for essentially proper use. And so that's where this is going.
And for so long, we've treated privacy and security as either or. Aren't they one of the same two sides of a coin if done right?
I think so. I think that last statement is key, when done right. And I think it requires a great deal of intentionality and sort of digging into the issue when it comes to these digital identity technologies as well, things like mobile driver's licenses.
Huge implications.
Those are already here, and they're certainly going to continue to spread.
Biometrics and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. Justin, we're getting near the end of our time. What questions didn't I ask that I should have, and or what stories keep you most excited going forward?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the what we were just talking about there, some of the digital identity pieces is one of that's a topic that long term really interests me. How that's kind of the big story, I think, behind all this chatter is how does the government continue to adapt to this digital world that we now live in and deliver services better, deliver services more securely, secure itself on the back end, respect privacy, and ensure that we continue to have strong privacy to the extent possible. I think that's a fascinating story, and so this effort to build up the do not pay database and combat fraud, I think, is intertwined with stories of cybersecurity, stories of IT modernization. I think across the board, seeing some of those connections that are just below the surface is what excites me.
And things are moving so fast, and we can't let ethics and privacy and everything else be a footnote in whatever it is we're building, or let an incident respond and then we have a draconian approach and don't get our arms around it. Justin, thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you for your crackerjack reporting. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep seeking the big stories, and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.